At the time this happened, I'm from a big city in Germany. That afternoon, I wanted to buy a birthday present for a friend. I planned on taking the subway downtown to where all the shops were. Even though my home city is fairly big, it's considered really safe. So I never really felt unsafe going to friends' houses or downtown all by myself. While I was waiting on the platform, this guy kind of slowly walked past me and stopped just a few meters away from me. I remember he must have been in his late teens or early 20s, and he had these glasses on. While I looked around the platform board since the subway wouldn't arrive for another 3 minutes, I noticed the guy was now staring at me. Being a rather shy girl back then, I very quickly looked away. After a few seconds, I wanted to check if he was still looking, so I peeked a quick glance. Surely enough, the guy was still staring, completely unblinking. This went on until the subway arrived. By then, I was feeling really uncomfortable. Luckily, there had been a few other people on the platform, so I still felt fairly safe. I got on and succeeded in snatching one of the few empty seats left. Since it was close to Christmas and the subway was completely packed, I couldn't see the guy from my seat anymore, so I calmed down, thinking he must have lost me. A couple of minutes later, I got off at my stop and took the escalator up to the street. While standing there on the escalator, though, I got a sudden sharp feeling up my spine and turned around. My heart sank. The creepy guy from the platform was standing just a bit behind me on the same escalator, staring into my back. I tried to calm myself down. This station was a popular meeting spot, and a lot of people who wanted to go shopping got off there. Since it was close to Christmas, he was probably just doing some shopping for his family, right? When I arrived on the street, I turned right, walked down that street, and turned right again at the next corner. When I turned the corner, I quickly looked down the street I'd come from. The guy was following me. I felt really uncomfortable now. I entered a bookshop and hid behind a bookshelf, waiting for the guy to walk to wherever he was heading to. After a few minutes, I went outside, and that was the moment I started to panic. I thought the guy must have walked past. It had been a long time since I'd hid. It turned out, though, the guy was standing just a few meters away, just out of sight, waiting. I should have run back into the store and called my parents to come pick me up. Instead, stupid 14-year-old me hoped there must be a more logical explanation for this guy's behavior. Maybe he was just waiting for someone else. I got out of the store and walked in the opposite direction of where that guy was. I started to walk faster, hoping that if he was following me, I would lose him amongst all the other shoppers that were now around. When I turned right at the next corner, as I was walking around the block, I looked back down the street again. He was now even closer behind me. I walked even faster, and I felt like I was about to cry, but I knew I had to keep calm. I turned right once more when I looked back and could still see him behind me. I was now positive he was following me. What other reason would he have to walk around the block entirely without entering any of the stores? I tried to think of a way to escape when suddenly I saw my chance. The street light on the crossing just a few meters in front had just turned red, so I started sprinting as fast as I could. I managed to just barely make it to the other side before the traffic started flowing through. I looked back. The guy hadn't managed to make it across the street in time and was standing on the other side, waiting for the light to turn green again. He was still staring at me, but this time with a really creepy, wide grin. At that moment, I felt as scared as I had never been before in my life. I started running again, this time into a huge department store a few meters away from me. Luckily, I knew that this particular store had another entrance at the back, facing a different street. On that street, there was usually a line of cabs waiting to pick up shoppers. I sprinted through the store and right out the other entrance. To my greatest relief, there was the usual line of cabs. I practically jumped into the first one in tears. I told the cab driver my home address and shouted for him to go quickly. I frantically looked back to the door, expecting the man to burst out any moment. Fortunately, I didn't see him. I'm still thankful that the cab driver instantly started driving and only asked what happened and if I was all right when we were already a few blocks away. In tears and completely shaken, I told him about the man that had been following me and how scared I was. When we arrived at my parents' house, he refused to charge me and waited outside until I was safely indoors. To this day, I'm still grateful to that cab driver. I don't know if that guy who was following me was just playing a very cruel prank on me and just wanted to scare me, or if he had something way more sinister in mind. When I was about 13 years old, I used to love going to explore out in the hills around my aunt's house. It was really fun, and I often found some really interesting things out there too. One time, I stumbled upon this cave. Part of me really wanted to go and explore it, but I knew it wouldn't be a good idea by myself. I decided to save that for another time. When I went home though, it really began to bother me. I regretted not exploring that cave. I felt like I was some sort of coward, and I really didn't want to feel that way. I wanted to go back and find out what was in there. About a month later, I went to stay with my aunt again. This time, I knew I was going to seek out that cave and explore it to its fullest. I brought a flashlight, a snack, and some water as well. I didn't really need much because I knew it would be a shallow cave, and it wouldn't take me very long at all. After about an hour of exploring the hills, I finally found that cave again. I guess I should explain the kind of cave it was. It was on the rocky side of a hill, and the entrance was quite short. I would have to get on my belly and push myself under it. Looking at it, I knew it would be an extremely tight fit. My curiosity was really strong though, so I decided to go ahead and go for it. I got down on my belly and slowly began to crawl into that cave. I wasn't sure how deep it was, or if it ever got any taller. What I was sure about was that it was very dark inside. The entrance was so small that not much light was able to get inside it. Thank God I decided to bring the flashlight with me. Right as I began crawling in further though, I became aware of this really odd noise. A sort of rustling sound followed by a weird shrieking noise. It sent a real shiver down my spine. In a bit of panic, I moved down a bit. I tried to pull my foot out, but I wasn't able to move it because it was throbbing in agony. I cried out a bit, and then I heard that rustling noise again. It was too dark to see anything, so I grabbed my flashlight. The sound was probably just nothing, but I would, of course, be scared until I knew that for sure. I moved my hand on the flashlight and switched it on, then moved it toward the direction of that sound. I saw the worst possible thing. A cave full of the scariest looking bats I'd ever seen. Only a couple of yards away from me, they were hanging from the ceiling, and all of them were staring at me. I screamed and did my best to pull myself free. My leg throbbed in agony as I moved. I don't know what it was, the crying or the flashlight. But the bats got restless, and they started to fly right at me. Stupidly, but instinctively, I swatted at them to defend myself. Two things happened in that moment. My leg finally pulled loose of the wall, and the bats began to bite me because I'd swatted at them. It felt like I was jabbed with sharp, thin needles. I screamed again and tried to pull myself out of that cave. If you've ever seen the movie Terminator, my experience was very similar to Sarah Connor's climbing through the machinery at the end. My leg was injured now, and I was crawling through an area that my body was wedged into. I was panicked and scared of the bats all around me, trying to bite me. I was scared I was going to get something real bad because I'd just gotten bit. It took me a long time to crawl my way out. I was breathing heavily with fear, and I had never felt so claustrophobic before. It took me a long time to get out, and by the time I did, I was hyperventilating. I tried to stand up on my foot, but my leg gave out. I had to crawl the rest of the way until I was able to get a broken branch on the ground I could use as a crutch. I was hurting really bad, and I was scared I had probably just contracted rabies. I felt super sick. It took me nearly 3 hours to limp back to my aunt's house. In my gut, I just felt I had rabies and was going to die. If I had been more educated about bats, I would have known that only 0.5% of them actually carry rabies. My feeling of being sick was probably psychosomatic exacerbated by my fear and anxiety of hurting my foot. But I had to get a rabies shot anyway. It wasn't nearly as bad as people might tell you it is, but it's still not pleasant by any means. Turns out my ankle had been fractured, and I had to get a cast for it. Nowadays, I don't go into small caves or other small areas either. I'm completely claustrophobic, and although more educated about bats now, I'm really scared by them. One summer when I was around 5 years old and my sister was around 8. We are both females, by the way. I awoke to hear through our bedroom window my parents shouting loudly on the back patio. This was not a common occurrence, and when they did fight, it was not typically anywhere there was a chance of us hearing. This sort of thing did happen from time to time, though. And though the situation was mildly unusual, we shrugged it off. We shut the window and went back to sleep. We promptly forgot about that whole ordeal. It wasn't until years later when we learned the truth about all that yelling. As a near adult, I overheard my mother explaining the situation to a family member in another room. Apparently, at some point in the night after my sister and I had gone to bed that night, our parents had received an unusual phone call from someone using an electronic interpreter, the same type of technology a person who's deaf might use to make calls and communicate over the phone. Understandably, my parents were a little bit surprised. We didn't know anyone who would use this service to contact us. Either way, they accepted the call, though I'm not sure how the person on the other line introduced themselves, or if they even did at all. They knew the full names of everyone in my family immediately. That was very creepy and alarming. The conversation soon escalated as the person on the other end of the phone line specifically explained what our house looked like. They told my parents they were hiding in our backyard, which was large, dark, and full of all kinds of plants and trees, making it very hard to clearly see. There were too many places to look. At this point, the tormentor made it clear they had intentions of entering our home and killing my sister and me. At this point, understandably, my parents were beginning to become frantic. Sure, there was a chance that nobody was out there and this was just some kind of cruel joke, but that notion was not worth the risk of believing. My dad asked if they really were where they said they were. If so, what were my parents doing at that moment? What were they wearing? Just like that, the person on the other end of the line explained exactly what my father was doing mid-action, exactly what they were both wearing, where certain items on our patio were placed. The expression on my mom's face as he said this, every detail. My dad, a rough guy with a heart of gold, charged into the night, ready to kill any person he encountered. Neither of my parents had cell phones. I don't think they were even a thing at this time. My mom grabbed the phone, which had been put down by my dad, and called the cops. As brave and stupid as my dad was for venturing into the dark that night, he found nothing out there. When the cops arrived shortly thereafter, they found nothing either. The police were not able to trace the call because of the electronic interpreter, which they said was a fairly common device used by people trying to anonymously harass others over the phone. Nothing ever came of this incident, and as I said, I was not told about it until at least a decade after it happened. Was this the work of a former friend or enemy trying to play some kind of cruel joke? Was there an actual murderer in my backyard? I guess we'll never know.